Hi there, and welcome to Trib Talk. Today we're going to be talking about Indigenous mascots. This is a discussion that's happening across the country. Schools and professional sports teams are re-examining their mascots in light of discussions on discrimination and racial profiling. The NFL's team in Washington is going to retire its name. And here in Utah, there's been a look at the mascot at Bountiful High School, which is the Braves. I'm joined by Dustin Jansen with the Division of Indian Affairs in Utah. He's the director. Welcome, Dustin.
Hi.
And then I'm also joined by Roni Joe Draper, who's a professor at the David O. McKay School of Education at Brigham Young University. Hi, Roni.
Hi there.
So let's start off with a discussion about Bountiful High School. So students there dress up in red face for assemblies. They have a student dress up as an American Indian mascot under the name of the Braves, and they call the opposing team's entrance the Trail of Tears. Let's maybe start with if this is problematic. Roni, you're shaking your head. Do you want to start with that?
It is problematic. And it's problematic because it is putting forth stereotypes, and it is portraying historic events in ways that we probably wouldn't want to portray them. And it is essentially putting forth a curriculum in a school setting. And so whenever that is the case, we always have to look at the curriculum, look at what the outcomes of that curriculum are, and whether we are satisfied with those outcomes. And when the outcomes are putting forth, stereotypes, distorting history, trampling over sacred histories, those sorts of things, that's problematic.
Right.
And the bottom line.
Dustin, do you want to jump in here? Are there things that kind of stand out to you? The Tribune has talked to some folks who are upset that some of the students are wearing like feathers in their hair or red face. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think anytime that we can compare this to probably what we call blackface in entertainment, right? And that's not accepted. For the majority of people, it's not accepted, and it shouldn't be accepted for Native American cultures either. I agree with Professor Draper that when we start naming things after historical events, we kind of delegitimize the event itself that happened. The Trail of Tears was a horrible event for the Southeast tribes that moved from the southeast of the United States, past west of the Mississippi to Oklahoma. They lost a lot of membership. It was a forced removal. And so to equate it on the same level as probably a game is probably not the most respectful thing to do. And I don't think we would do that with other historical events that happen in the world. We wouldn't probably bring up the Holocaust or another 9/11. But these events that happen in Native America those feelings are there, and they're true, and they were real for Native people, and they still are. We have a lot of Native people living in Oklahoma that are not originally from Oklahoma because they were moved there. And so anytime that you do action like this, I think it can cause a harmful effect on Natives today. And I think that's the big problem also. It's that we associate Native America through mascots and things as figures of the past, rather than people that actually live today and breathe today and carry on and live their lives. So I think that's why it's a big problem.
Sure. And we have to ask ourselves, because there are natives, living today, we're two natives who are living today, speaking with you today, having this conversation. And there are Native kids, Native families who are attending those schools, who are attending those games. And we certainly have to consider what their experiences are when they have to see, those depictions carried out in sort of a mocking kind of way. It's cruel, and it has no place in a place that ought to be promoting sportsmanship, for sure.
And that's a good point. I mean, let's talk about Bountiful as a whole is a majority white, and Bountiful High School also majority white. According to the State Board of Education statistics, there's actually only one American Indian student at Bountiful High School, which is kind of shocking when you then see that the mascot is the Braves. That family has spoken out against the mascot, but there's also Native American alumni who have said that they support it. So is there a flip side of this? Is there a way that these mascots do, quote, honor Native Americans, as some people might suggest? Dustin, do you want to start?
I guess I should have started off with saying, I understand people have ties to their mascots. My high school, we were the Cougars, right? I'm hardcore Tohatchi Cougar, and it's fun for me. It links you to your family, it links you to your friends, and the experiences you had while growing up. So I know why there's a tie to mascots. And you're growing up with people, you're experiencing new things. I can see that tie. But I, at the same time, when we're using races as mascot, it changes the thing a little bit. It changes the conversation a little bit. And we have to ask ourselves, is that the way this particular community of people want to be honored? And I said it earlier, is it an honor to equate an entire culture or entire 574 cultures to a game? Raise the level of that, raise the level of the honoring of these people to the level of a game, right? And that's a hard thing to say, and it's a hard thing to realize. But that, our Native culture shouldn't be linked to a mascot in a high school. My identity as a person, as a Native American person, or as a member of a Native American community doesn't stand on whether or not I'm being honored at a game, and it shouldn't. It stems from, my family. It stems from the teachings I grew up with. It stems from the culture that I was brought up in and how that's portrayed to others. And I think that maybe Native people should have the say, or should be the voice on how they're being portrayed.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think if we're looking for ways to honor Native peoples, I mean, I am not opposed to that. I think that, if we want to do that, let's do that by teaching the truth in our schools. Let's do that by changing up the curricula and making sure that Native histories are taught. Let's talk about Native people in the present and honor those people who are part of our Native present. Let's honor Native futures and those possibilities. Let's we have a long ways to go to do those sorts of things. Having a mascot called the Braves, which doesn't really represent any particular Native community, Native peoples. It doesn't help us understand anything about any particular group of people, whether, especially in this state, whether it's the Shoshone or the Utes or the Paiutes, Navajo. We don't get any more information about those peoples. And then, as I've already said, or we've already discussed, it leads to the promotion of inappropriate behavior by non-Native people at a game, which is sort of a non-Native space, and it just doesn't make sense. And so I think those kinds of things we could talk about. What are some other ways that we could not honor Native peoples, if that's what we're trying to do, that doesn't have to be attached to a basketball game and inappropriate kinds of behaviors and costumes and those sorts of things.
Right. And Roni, as kind of an expert in education here, there have been several studies that talk about the psychology of having these mascots and how it can actually harm students who are in the minority. Can you tell me a little bit about those studies and kind of what you make of them?
Yeah, I think that, young people are, especially adolescents are in the process of identity formation. And when they are, just in a nutshell, when they are in spaces where their identities are being ridiculed, or where stereotypes of their identities are being put forth, then that their identity formation can suffer from that. And when you say, well, there's only one student, in a school of, however many, for me, I think, that one student deserves to be protected. That one student deserves to be nurtured. That one student deserves to have a space where they get to thrive just as much as every other student in the building. We've already experienced in this country a lot of pain and threats of survivance toward Native peoples. And we can stop it now, and it's not that difficult, or it's not hard. It's just change some behaviors, change some names, and it's going to be a little pinchy. People are going to feel a little bit sad, and in a couple of years, people will get over it. And and if we know that we're doing it because we don't want to cause harm, I think that we can find it in our hearts to do that.
And I think what Roni said there, right, causing harm, is someone, if you're doing something and someone says you're hurting them, you have two choices. You can keep doing it, or you can adjust what you're doing to stop hurting people. And I think it's in its most basic sense, it's being polite. I think a political correctness like this, in its most basic sense, someone saying, please don't call me that, the polite thing to do would be to stop calling them that. I see a question on the side about the mascot on the Navajo reservation on Red Mesa High School, and they're called the Redskins. I don't know the background behind that, but I will tell you that there are schools all around the United States on reservations that have Indians, chieftains, warriors. That's the only Redskins one I know. But and why they came up with those names, that's really probably up to that community. I don't know the history behind all of it. I know that people talk about that area right now and discuss whether or not they should change it. And it's a discussion. But what's neat about this is that they are talking about it and they are having that discussion. And if you look right over into Salt Lake, we have the University of Utah, the Utes. They had that university, the University of Utah, contacted the Northern Ute tribe out in Fort Duchesne and said, hey, we'd like to do this. How can we do this appropriately? And the Ute tribe said, this is how we'd like it to happen. You can use our name, but please don't represent us as a mascot, right? They don't have an Indian running around the field or on the side of the court. They have a red-tailed hawk, and even their logo doesn't have a Native person on it. It's a drum with a big U on it with a feather hanging from it. But the Northern Utes had a say in that, and they spoke with that university and said, hey, how can we do this? And I think it's something that our state is moving to, and that's just simple communication and consultation. I know on the state level, we try to do that a lot. And in my office, that's our job. When we have a state agency or state department that says, hey, who's my counterpart in tribal government? We make sure that they contact the correct person and they're having that discussion before anything big happens that may affect tribal governments or their sovereignty or the health and welfare of that tribe. And, and Governor Herbert's really big on this and speaking about this. And so that's something that can be done. And that's just opening the doors up the conversation. Back to what Roni said about the Braves being a very general and an open mascot. It doesn't refer to any one tribe in particular. That can be dangerous, because now we're using large stereotypes and large large representations of and mixing things, right? And we might go a little overboard sometimes in how we do that. I mean, the Trail of Tears did not happen in Utah, right? and so, but we're bringing that over here. And when those generalizations and stereotypes are used, it can be harmful to anyone.
Right. Let's focus a little bit more on that. So, the University of Utah, as you mentioned, does have this agreement with the Ute tribe to use the name, and it is a specific name, and they do have that communication with the tribe on how best to do that. But the Bountiful Braves is this kind of big name, or the Redskins is obviously kind of a worse step further. And so tell me a little bit about that. Maybe Roni, let's start with you. I mean, is there kind of a division? Is there like a okay Native American mascot and an obviously not okay one?
Well, I think, there are, as anything, there is a range, right? There are words that are used as racial slurs. There are other words and things that would not be used as a racial slur. Certainly, the term Ute that we, isn't a racial slur. That's the name of a tribe. And so brave, can get into sort of a slippery place. Chief is another one that can get into kind of a slippery place. Certainly that is a term of honor, and people have used that as a slur against individuals, so that can get real tricky, and so that deserves some conversation. But again, we have to think about what are the other behaviors that are going on, around the deal. I was having a conversation with my father last night, and and he was, and he said there's a lot of good things about being Native, and I said, well, of course there are, and he thought, if they were bringing in some of those good ideas about what it means to be Native, about what it means to be communal, to be looking out for one another, if that was part of the team spirit, that would be a good thing to be part of the team conversation. I agreed with that. But then he also said, he goes, but I don't want to see some half-naked white guy running around the field whooping it up. I agree with that too, Dad. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we have to take into consideration, that's when we've crossed the line into offense. And sometimes we, if we're in an all white space, maybe we don't know where that line is, because we're not in conversation with Indigenous peoples to know what that line is. And so, just like what Dustin was saying, we have to figure out, how do we remain in the conversation, and who do we bring into that conversation? Who does Bountiful bring into that conversation to ensure that they're making good decisions about what they're doing? Those are the challenges that we're having. But I think, whether it's a good name, whether it's a bad name, maybe isn't really part of the conversation. It's, what are the behaviors? What are the consequences? What is this, what are the implications? And, how do the people feel? Because it's not just about the kids who go there, and it's not about the alumni, because we have visiting players coming as well, and they're also experiencing those things. And we might see them just as our opponents, but they have to also, in a school setting, we have a duty to care about their experiences as well.
Yeah, and going off that, we, by looking at the behaviors names bring out, it doesn't always bring out the best in people. Even schools that have Native mascots that are just on the ball and respectful and do everything right, the teams they play may not, right?
Sure.
If you have the Illinois Illini that do their best, right, to have a strong a native mascot. But then, like in the 80s, they were going to play Iowa, and on the Iowa campus, they hung effigies of Native American people all up and down Greek Road, and the students at Iowa were like, somebody needs to help. I go to school here, who's going to help me? Why do I have to walk through this every day this week when we play Illinois? It may bring out the worst in your opponents, if not, even if your school is doing everything they can to be respectful. And you can say, well, that's on them, but really, why give them the opportunity? Why make it an issue to be debated and give people opportunity to be disrespectful? And so it's even if Bountiful does everything they can, the schools they play may not react in that way either, just because of their mascot name.
Right, and then that's placing those Indigenous young people in harm's way.
Yeah.
Because they have to experience those images and sort of deal with those, and there may not really be other people around who can help them sort of support them, help them understand, and if there are people who are just saying, oh, it's no big deal, it's just a game, that just undermines their whole experience.
That's a good point. And I should bring up the one student who identifies as American Indian at Bountiful High School has said this has been personally hard for her. She doesn't like sitting in the auditorium and seeing a white student dressed up as a mascot on stage. So I think that's a good point. Dustin, I'd like to turn to you. Are there any other mascots in the country on race, or is this only natives, and why? Why only natives?
To my knowledge, there are not other races in America that are serving as mascots. Sometimes I teach at Utah Valley University. I teach American Indian Studies there also. Sometimes I'll have a student say, well, what about the Dallas Cowboys? And I'm like, well, Cowboys is a profession. It's being a cowboy is not a race. That's a role that you choose to play, because they had the Mighty Friars or the strong beat diggers, the missionaries. Those are not races, right? Those are things that you can change, you can choose to be. So that's a little different. And I think it's pretty accepted that we wouldn't use other races as mascots if we started using African Americans or Latinos or Asian people as mascots, or using different faiths as mascots. I think you would hear that you'd put a stop to that pretty quick. And it does beg the question, why is it okay with Native people? And I think for a large part of it is that I think a large portion of America doesn't realize that Native people still exist, that they're, just federally recognized tribes. There's 574 of them. They're tribes with tribal membership, operating sovereign governments with a government-to-government relationship with the federal government and with the states. When I was in college, and it wasn't that long ago, I'll just date myself, late 90s, when I was finishing off college, I used to visit elementary schools and do programs on Native America for elementary schools. And more than once was I introduced as, this is Dustin. He's not a real Indian, but he's going to talk to you about them. Or even though all the Indians are dead, we're going to learn a little bit more about them today. And this was from first grade to sixth grade. I was hearing this from different teachers, in the classroom, and I've actually said, hey, how many people think I actually went to school and not even the teacher raised her hand? I'm like, you do realize BYU sent me here, right? I had to get into the Y somehow, and that's a big thing. And my daughter even, my daughter in middle school today, where they're learning about Native Americans, and one of her classmates says, why are we even studying about this? There's no more, and my daughter's like, I'm right here, and the teacher was like, no, you're not. And she goes, yes, I am. And she named her tribes and said, this is who I am. She goes, I know people don't think I look Native, but these are my tribes. And I don't say anything sometimes because I don't like the way people react to it sometimes. because she's actually had a former friend, come up to her and say, you know what, I didn't know you're a Native. I can't be your friend anymore. And that's today. This is just last semester, fall semester before COVID, right? This is something that Native students in school in this state deal with. And so anything that can help people get along better, to have better understanding of each other, and to do right by one another, I think it should be encouraged. And so I think that's the main thing. And we might have to, the state of Utah might need to, and they're doing this, and they need to teach not only about Natives in history, they need to teach about Natives in civics, in modern government. You know, you can't just talk about federal government, state government in your counties. You should also include in there your tribal governments and how they operate, to help people understand that Native people are still here, right? And they're living and they're contributing and doing things, you know.
But I think that we, you know, when the first, first colonizers came to the North American shores, they looked upon Native peoples and they saw primitive peoples. They saw what they considered as savages, people without, who were uncultured. They determined that they were people who didn't have governments, didn't have families, and they just viewed them as less than human. And when you view other people as less than human, you can do really terrible things to them. And so we see what happened, the treatment of Native peoples throughout time, currently until through today. We see that occurred with African American and Black people who were brought to this country and enslaved and treated cruelly throughout our history, continuing through today. And so I think, you know, that question of, are there other races that are considered mascots? No, because other races aren't necessarily deemed as less than white, or as deemed as not as considered as equal, or considered as as fully human as whites. And so, you can have animals and you can have Natives. I think that is telling that that Native peoples are not deemed as fully human when they're deemed as mascots, similar to bears and cougars and badgers. And again, it may seem like a little thing, and it may seem like I'm making a big deal out of something that's little. But it isn't. For me, my kids are grown, but now I've got grandbabies, but I have to teach them these things. These are, how do you explain it? How do you explain the foolish behavior that happens at a game? It's tough, and it's the same thing. People are saying, Indians don't exist, and then, my grandbabies are saying, is that right? No, it isn't right, because your grandpa exists, your grandma exists, your great grandpa exists, we're still here. And so I have to be in a position to tell my children and my grandchildren that what they're hearing in school is false. And I'd rather not be in that position.
To me, this sounds like we've taken centuries of oppression and put it into even more oppression today. Just the way we even tell the history. If you look at Bountiful's website today, just for the city, I mean, it tells this history of, oh, this city was founded by Mormon settlers and there were, quote, hostile Indians here. I mean, even what we're telling as the history of Bountiful isn't necessarily an accurate portrayal. I mean, the Shoshone tribe was here before any settlers came in. So even the history of the city is kind of through, you know, a certain lens. I mean, are we failing in education? Are we failing in teaching that history to students?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But you know that
we don't have all day to go through all the ways that we're doing bad things to Native peoples.
Yeah, you know, but this is just one of those things where we really need to just make an effort to treat each other better. You know, I'm from New Mexico, but I like Utah, and I like Utah for my kids. I think it's a wonderful place. But if I can make it better for them, then why not? If we can make things better and easy and more enjoyable for our neighbors, why wouldn't we? And I think that's something that we should consider. Another thing we should consider is, you know, just having the discussion without yelling at each other and just really trying to see the other's point of view, you know, and having that that consultation with the tribes in your area, even, you know, and as a state, really look into changing our curriculum so we can better educate our kids. There was a president of the Cherokee Nation. Her name was Wilma Mankiller, and she, I'm summarizing, but she said, public perception creates public policy, right? How we see people determines how we treat them, right? And if we see everybody as human beings, as good people, we're going to treat them as human beings, as good people. And that's not just in our curriculum, but that's in our laws. That's in the people we pass on the street. You know, how you see people is going to determine how you treat them. And this is a step in that direction, I think, and an opportunity to start treating people better.
Perfect. And we are about out of time, but I want to end on this question. And it's kind of two parts. Why are people so attached to these mascots? And what do we do next? What is the next step on resolving this? Either of you want to take that on?
Well, I mean, this goes back to identity again, you know, and we're talking about, especially at high school level, again, you know, we go into schools, it is a positive thing to help young people create a sense of belonging, create identity around their schools. We know that young people who are connected with their schools, who feel a sense of belonging in their schools, are more likely to complete school, to do well in school, to attend school. And so that, you know, to have sort of a brand, you know, branding is a good thing. You know, so having a mascot, having, you know, songs, having, you know, ways that we participate with one another, that makes sense for developing identity, for developing a school identity, for developing belonging, for developing a school community. We know that matters, and that can be a good and a fun thing. And this is not about taking away good and fun things and important things that matter to young people and to a school community. We can continue to do that while teaching about humanity without being cruel, and with maintaining dignity for all the people who are members of the community. And so as much as we're able to do that, we ought to do that. And so I think that's what we ought to be, you know, talking about.
I like that. Dustin, yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of the next step?
You know, like I said, you know, and building off what Roni says, you know, that high school is a time to build that identity. It's a time that you're going to create a lot of memories. And when you meet all these people that you're sharing your life with at school, you're naturally going to bring that everything about that school into that identity and who you are. And that doesn't mean that you can't do it better, right? We can always do it better. And really, there's plenty of schools that do not have Indian mascots that have just as great of memories, just as great of fun, and have just the right amount of school spirit as anybody else. And so I think that that's something that you could consider. But I think for the most part, moving forward, we have to be willing to move forward. You have to be willing to find the courage to move forward, especially in the climate today. It's hard to say, you know what, maybe we can change, maybe we can change for the better. It's hard to do that right now, and so it takes some courage. And I think if we encourage one another and be supportive of one another, we can pull that off, in a way that all the citizens of Utah are represented in a good way, right? Because even though a lot of Native people in Utah live on reservations, they are still Utah citizens, and they are still represented by the state legislature, and they still are represented by our congressional delegation that goes into Washington, D.C. And we need to understand that we're all in this together, and that to make our state better than it is, because we can always get better. No one's perfect. And we need to be considerate and empathize with one another on a lot more than what we're doing currently.
Perfect. Well, there's a lot moving forward. Bountiful High School has said that it's going to consider whether or not to change this mascot in the coming months. So we will be following that. And I appreciate both of you so much. Thank you for your time, for joining us on Trib Talk.
Thank you
for hosting this conversation. I appreciate that.